Okay, we're back. Game changers. Think about it. Game changers. Moving the needle. I think this gentleman could perhaps possibly be a future game changer. And his name's Lloyd Pye. Lloyd, are you on the phone with us?
I sure am, Jesse. Glad to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us, sir. And like I said, you get granular with the subject. It's one of my favorite words, and it's going to be exciting to hear all about the amazing research you've been doing with a lot of stuff, like you said, that we've been taught incorrectly. So welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
If you don't mind me asking, where are you calling out of tonight?
Florida, the panhandle of Florida between Destin and Panama City.
Fantastic. I have relatives myself in Delray. Well, I think where I want to go tonight, Lloyd, first talk a little bit about your background, because what I found really interesting about you is that not only do you have a psychology degree from Tulane, but you also were in the Army. So why don't you tell us a little bit of career, because you did work in intelligence.
Right. I had an interesting career, such as it was. It's an embarrassing career, actually, to tell you the truth. It's not something you want to tell your family or your kids. You know the old line about what did you do in the war, Daddy? Well, I never had any children, but it wouldn't be something I would want to be proud to tell them. The truth of it was, in the intelligence work that I did, basically we just did background investigations. Now, understand this is in 1970, 71. Okay, so we're in the teeth of the Cold War. We're in the teeth of Vietnam. So it's a very different time than we have now. And at that time, Russia was the big enemy, and they were supposedly infiltrating us left and right. So what we did, what the intelligence agents did stateside, was check people to verify who were asking for security clearances, to verify that they had actual real backgrounds here in the States, that they weren't plants from Russia. You had to verify that they went to high school, that they went to college or wherever, just that they were real, true American citizens. And so a lot of what we did was actually legitimately that cause, that concern. A lot of people in the military, a lot of people in government needing security clearances of different kinds. So it was legitimate stuff. But a lot of what we did, this is the embarrassing part, a lot of what we did was check up on these young women between the ages of, say, 18 and 35, let's say. And that was because at that time there was an unwritten, unspoken, but very active rule that when any man of any power at all in America took a mistress, he was obligated, sort of, to have her checked out to make sure that she was an American girl. And so we did. That's what we did. We did an awful lot of that as well. So it's not anything to brag about.
So you were in charge of frisking powerful people's concubines?
Well, not frisking them, but checking them out. Just checking out that it was the real stuff, and that they could imbibe to their full extent without having to worry about it. And I don't know. I never found nothing that ever crossed my desk was not a legitimate girl, but. There were really hundreds of us in the country, and I'm sure that eventually some guys found Russian plants. I'm sure they existed. You wouldn't have had all that effort if there wasn't something to the story, but it just never happened to me.
It's so amazing when you learn about that time period, if you were a little guy, or if you weren't around like I wasn't back then, about the paranoia involved with
it was unreal. You were talking about what would you do in your last 2 years. You're sitting here 2 years. Luxury. You got everybody right now. Luxury. This is wonderful. We lived, I did for a good 20 years growing up and well into adulthood. I lived with the surety, not just the idea, but the surety that if someone went nuts in the Kremlin or if someone went nuts in the States and pressed a button, we'd all have about 15 minutes to live. I mean, that was the deal. You've got 15 minutes to live. because that was the little time it would take for one of those intercontinental ballistic missiles to come and, blow up. So that was really it. And we had a great comic in the South named Brother Dave Gardner, and he did a little bit on that was really cute. He said, people always say, what would you do if you found out you had those 15 minutes to live? What would you do if you found out that the missiles were on their way and you had the 15 minutes? What would you do? He said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd sit down and think about it. That's it.
Exactly, yeah. I know.
What the hell else could you do? I mean, what else could you do? I'd have to sit down and think about what I wanted to do in my last 15 minutes if that was really all I had. So anyway, that's the time that I come from, and that's a little bit of my background.
Okay, fair enough. And to react to that, I tried to get people to utilize this film to just start thinking about that short list of what would you do, So fair enough.
Well, 2 years is luxury compared to what we grew up with,
Absolutely.
I mean, luxury.
And later on in the program, maybe we'll take some calls together and have some fun with that. But let's get into how you obviously switched from this pretty. I'm gonna assume here, Lloyd, but pretty straight-laced person working, intelligence, military, rules, regulations, codes, ethics, whatever you want to call it, quote, end quote. And then 20 years you've been delving into all kinds of alternative sources of knowledge, and we're going to talk about some of your thoughts about Sasquatch, and then, of course, the intervention, which I want you to explain to this audience. How did that happen? How did your brain switch gears, or was it always switched?
Well, no, it was. I was really very much a straight arrow, as you say, through high school. I did the right thing through high school. I was the all-American boy. I was the kid that other parents threw up to their kids and say, why can't you be more like him, kind of thing. It just didn't occur to me. I came up with a strict militaristic dad and just followed the rules, and I found that pretty much the rules worked for me. I had a lot of things going for me, and I didn't really have a rough ride through high school. But when I got into college, I played football on a scholarship at Tulane, and there I began to run into the inequities and the imbalances of the world. And for me personally, I had a wonderful experience up through for the most of high school, and particularly in sports. I'd done really well, and then I got to Tulane, and I found out the gross mediocrity of most coaches at that level in the world, and it just, the dichotomy of it was a real shock to me, and I didn't get over it for quite a long time. And then my senior year, so I was beginning to rebel right then, and my senior year in college, I read a book about hominoids. It was called The Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life by Ivan Sanderson, and that was, and still is, one of the great books produced about the field of hominoid research, hominoid being Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Abominable Snowman, Yeti, and the two other kinds that dominated around the world that we can talk about later. But at that point, I read that book, and it was just a seminal moment in my life. I was like, okay, I want to know more about this. I believe this, man. I believe these things are real. I'm not being told the truth, and I want to know more, and I just began to work at it. And it wasn't really forbidden knowledge. It was just hidden. It wasn't easy to get to. It wasn't really common other than the work of that man, Ivan Sanderson. So I just got what I could whenever I could, but I continued on living my life, but keeping my eyes peeled and doing what I could and wanting to know more about hominoids. And so as about 10 years into that, by the time I was about 30, I understood, I just had a grip on the idea that what we were being told was pre-humans, and this was even before Lucy, but it was what little there was about the pre-humans at that time was clear to me that they were the fossil skeletons of the way people were describing these hominoids, these living, upright walking primates. So to me, it was just an easy connection to say, hey, the hominoids are the pre-humans, and so therefore humans don't have a place on the flow chart of life on Earth. Where did we come from? And it was clear to me then we didn't fit with anything else. We don't look like anything like primates that we're supposedly descended from, and we knew by then that the chromosome count was wrong for us, that all the higher primates had 48 chromosomes and we had only 46. So there were a lot of things coming up that was making it seem like we were Johnny-come-latelys here on Earth, but there was no way to explain it. And then Eric von Daniken produced his wonderful book in about 69, 70, just when I was graduating, or a year or two after. And then when von Daniken brought out the possibility that aliens had lived on the Earth, that was wonderful, Chariots of the Gods, but he had no mechanism. He didn't have a mechanism to explain how they got here and how the megaliths and the other things had gotten here. No mechanism. So he was just dismissed. Everybody knows what happened to him. But then Zecharia Sitchen in 1976 wrote a book called The 12th Planet, and that provided the mechanism. But unfortunately, I was by that time wrapped up in a fiction writing career, and I was living in L.A. and I became a screenwriter, and so I spent most of the 80s doing that. So I missed Sitchen's book for all that time, and somebody who directed me to it in about 1990. All of this time, I know the situation with the hominoids and the humans, but I don't have a mechanism for how we got here. So I'm just sort of sitting out there, can't do anything.
Hold on, Lloyd.
Sure. Yes.
Stay with me, because we're jumping there too fast. Because I want to stay on the hominoids for a second here, because we've had so basically the hominoids, a la Yeti, Bigfoot. That was your gateway into the alternate science realm, correct?
Right, exactly.
Now, we've had on the program, and you're probably familiar with this gentleman, I'm going to say his last name wrong, the author of Psychic Sasquatch, Jack Lapsaritis, I think.
Lapsaritis, yeah. Jack Kawani, he calls himself Kawani. I know Jack pretty well, right, yes.
So he was on the program, and I found him to be a very intelligent guy, but at the same time, I just always have the same questions about Bigfoot, and he was not in a position to really be able to answer any of the questions. He just said, here's the information, take it as you will. But why is it, I've always wanted to ask, people who are really intelligent in this field, how is it that something so large that we could not find any remains of at this point, or catch one, it seems like there's so many people looking for them. What is the status? Is this a real phenomenon? Are there really Bigfoot out there? I live in Portland here. This is Bigfoot country. So what's the truth?
Well, actually, there are thousands of them. To have breeding populations around the world on every continent except Antarctica, there literally have to be thousands of them. Now, I know this is shocking to you, and it is to most people, but we actually believe that we are masters of our domain, the famous Seinfeld thing, that we really are masters of the earth, that we control all of it. The truth of it is we don't really control more than half of it, if that much. And when I say control, I mean live to any appreciable degree on 50% of the habitable space of planet Earth. Take out the deserts, take out the ice caps, take out the oceans. I'm talking the habitable land. Human beings live in any number at all on only about half of it. So we own basically half the planet. They own half the planet. Now, where do they own? All of the deep forests, jungles, places where we don't habitually live. We live on the prime real estate. Humans live on the prime real estate of planet Earth. These creatures live on the non-prime real estate where we don't really go. Now, this is not to say we never go in there hunting deer. This is not to say we don't cut roads across great swaths of their territory. But they own it. They live there. It's not where we live, and we don't live in it because it's just so difficult to live there, to actually make a life there. What we do when we get in difficult terrain is we shave it down. For the most part, we just cut it down. We'll live in sparsely wooded areas, not a problem. But in the real heavy 4-tier layer forests, we don't live there. It's just you can't make your way. It's just too hard.
Okay,
so they have plenty of room. Number one. Now, why doesn't anybody find the bodies? Well, people who make their living in the woods will tell you they don't really find the bodies of anything. They can sometimes smell death, but wild animals hide themselves when they die. They know they're getting, unless they're killed like outright, in which something is going to consume them. But if you're an animal that's at the top of the food chain and nothing's going to really kill you, but you know you're dying, you're sick, and you're feeling bad, you take yourself off somewhere and you cover yourself up to protect yourself as you're going down. And so you will sort of almost like pre-bury yourself, but not bury in the ground, just hide your body. And then within a very short time, within a matter of a few weeks, Mother Nature cleans you down to nothing. Now you say, well, wait a minute. How can that be? That's exactly how it is, dust to dust. Germs, microbes, everything, you carry them in your body. They're going to break you down to nothing, to your bones, and then bacteria and mold and fungi are going to destroy your bones. So Lloyd, that's why there just aren't skeletons found.
But was there a significant piece of research? Was there a light bulb that went on in your head with just respect to Sasquatch that told you this is legitimate? I mean, did you see one? I mean, we're talking with
I did. Yes, I did. I saw not a living one, but I saw the Minnesota Iceman. Now, I saw the Patterson film shortly after it was done in '69, and that was when, not long after I had read the books, Abominable Snowmen that I mentioned to you. So I really believe the Patterson film was real. I was able to study it when it was in its first and second and third incarnation, so you could see the muscles. If you studied that film in real slow-mo, you could see the muscles rippling. You still can. I mean, it's not hard. You can see the muscles rippling under the skin. Now, in 1967, 68, 69, when the film was taken, the technology of suits was the original. Of coverings like that was the original Planet of the Apes. You couldn't, and you still can't really, glue a suit to the skin of somebody so that their skin, their muscles will ripple under their skin the way you see the Bigfoot in the Patterson's film, her muscles rippling. You can't do it because if you...
I don't want to break down the Patterson. What about your site? You said you saw one of these creatures.
Oh, well, I saw the Minnesota Iceman, and that's a different story, same time approximately, but a man named Frank Hansen. Now you can read a lot of stories about how the Iceman came to be. Hansen himself tried never to tell the truth about it. Those of us who have researched it pretty heavily know pretty much what happened. He was deer hunting in Minnesota, and he shot one in the back, a juvenile, and he shot it in the back, and he severed its spine, and so it went down, but it wasn't dead. And he walked up to the front of it, and he lifted his rifle to finish it off, to give it a headshot and finish it off. It lifted its left arm. He shot it. The bullet went through its left wrist, went into its left eye socket, blew its right eyeball out of its head, and blew out the back of its head. And so he took it home. His son apparently and he were out hunting together, so they were able to muscle it up into a four-wheeler and get it out of there, drained it out, the blood out of it as much as they could, cleaned it off, put it in a 7-foot floor freezer. He was a carnival huckster, this guy was, so he knew what to do. And he put it in that floor freezer, filled it up with water, put plexiglass over the top of it, and then took it around to carnivals and mall openings and things like that for about 10 years while the body slowly decayed on the bottom side, because ice will slow down the process of decay, but it won't eliminate it. So I saw that when it was in 1976, when it had been out for like 8 years, 7 years, something like that. And I was 30 years old. I had perfect eyesight. I knew what I was going there to see. I studied it for like over 30 minutes, about 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes. And I can assure anybody, you could see the bullet holes, you could see the wounds, you could see the bone chips blown out of the wrist hanging on. You could see, the main thing you could see is these tendrils of pink plasma, blood and plasma seeping out of the wounds up in tendrils, in like ribbons, up to the surface and making little pools up there on the top of the ice as the ice was freezing. The hair in the water lifted the hair up off the skin so you could see right down to the skin where you could see. It just, there's no doubt in my mind what I saw. That was a real, true, living thing in that ice. And, I know I saw it, and I know what I saw. So, I have no doubt that they are real. There's so much anecdotal evidence. The footprints alone, there's so many footprints. I think there are over 10,000, they say, casts or photographs of footprints, of quality hominoid footprints. Now, like crop circles, yes, there are fakes. There are fakes. Fakes have a distinctive look about them. Most people know when anybody that really studies it knows when they're looking at a fake, just like when you're looking at a fake crop circle. They have those lines that look kind of like records on them. So anybody that really studies these things, you don't get fooled. But for the most part, the tracks that you see of hominoids, when you see them and they're not perfect, they don't look absolutely 100% great, those are the real ones. The ones that just look perfect, just stamped out cookie cutter like, those are going to be your fakes. So there is so much evidence for the footprints being real. That's a whole branch of science, by the way. It's called ichnology, which is the study of tracks. But do you hear ichnology reports on the hominoid tracks? No, because these are things science doesn't want to deal with. And when science doesn't want to deal with something, when they know that it's going to upset the apple cart and just wreck their lives, just make their lives absolutely miserable, they will work very, very hard to avoid any truth about that particular area coming out. And hominoids is one of those areas, because the first time that somebody really is able to prove hominoids are real, so many things are going to change. It would be the equivalent, literally, of UFOs being proved real, a UFO landing on the White House lawn or something like that. It's going to completely change the way we view ourselves in our own place here on the planet. Whether UFOs come in or an alien comes in and shows us that we're part of a much larger system out there, or if a hominoid is proved real, it proves to us that we did not evolve here on the planet. Either way, that is a massive, massive headache for science to deal with, and so they do all they can to thwart people from finding out not just the truth about it, but any semblance of the truth about it.
Okay, but here's my question. And again, I'm open-minded about the subject.
Sure.
If someone says to me, does the government have dead alien bodies in their possession? They do. We know this to be a fact. They've crashed here, and we've collected the bodies. I guess what I'm a little curious about is the technology that we have today. Okay, and now I'm anti-hunting in all respects. I don't care if you're a hunter, sorry, but I just don't like killing things.
I'm not a hunter either. Yeah, I'm the same way.
I was hoping that you weren't, but I'm just open about it. I remember someone asked me how I felt about hunters hunting, and I said if I could hunt the hunters, I'd be having a great time. But I don't enjoy killing things, but there's plenty of people that do, Lloyd. And with the technology, the Ted Nugents out there, and these crazy computers and the high weaponry, how are they not able to find these enormous animals and get one of them? What are they
Oh,
doing?
they could. They absolutely could, Jesse. Seriously, if somebody wanted one, really wanted one. Now again, I just said science works very hard to avoid this. But if somebody, let's just say, a millionaire came along like Tom Slick back in the 50s. There was a man named Tom Slick, and he paid for a lot of the early expeditions to try to find evidence about hominoids, and he brought the whole thing to the public attention. If there was another millionaire who were to come along and say, I want to find this thing, I want to bring one in, all you have to do, literally all you have to do, is go up into the areas like where you live, in the Pacific Northwest particularly, where they are in great numbers, and get some of that heat-sensing equipment that they have on those Apache helicopters. You've seen, I'm sure, the films that go out of our guys blowing up the Taliban guys. You just see the gray shadows of the people running along, and you see the bullets blowing them to Kingdom Come. Well, we could do that. We could do absolutely. It just is a matter of money. It's always about money. Money is denied people in alternative knowledge. There's no way for us to tap into grants the way science can. Grants just go begging at the end of the year, which is why you get all these asinine reports on Jay Leno and stuff about where, or Letterman, where the government or somebody is spending money on the most ridiculous studies. It's because the grants, they can't find enough things to give them to in mainstream science. We don't get a dime of that in alternative work. We have to do it all the hard way. But if somebody wanted to do it within about 6 weeks, you could just put either really good helicopters up with really, really good mufflers on them, and just have them fly over those woods at night looking, and get one just like they got Che Guevara back, if you can remember him. They just used the U-2s to zero in on the campfires up in the mountains of Bolivia, or wherever, I think it was Bolivia, and they just found the campfire fires, and they got the soldiers down at the base and put them in a circle and let them walk up to the top, and they got him. You could do the same sort of thing. You could do it if you wanted to, and if you were willing to put the money into it, probably 6 weeks it'd be done.
Fair enough. Let's move on, because we only have a limited amount of time with you, Lloyd, and there's about 100 things to talk.
Right. I can always come back, so we'll get it covered.
Well, what I want you to do is come next time you're in the area over here, take me out in the woods and tell me where to go, because I'd love to see one of these things.
Well, I'll tell you what I did one time. I went to Oklahoma, and you can find these anywhere. Every state in the Union, every state except Hawaii, you can go. And these guys in eastern Oklahoma kept saying, you got to come. We've got them here. You got to come. So I went to see, and sure enough, the evidence was all over the place. And we're out in the woods, and they said, now watch this. And they took a piece of wood called ironwood, really hard stuff, and whacked a tree. I said, just watch one time. You just whack it one time, and you wait. Now, they said, give it 5-10 minutes. They're around. One of them heard it, and they're going to start coming our way. And you're going to see crows flying overhead, because the crows kind of follow around to let everything else know where they are. And sure enough, within 10 minutes, there were crows flying. They said, okay, now one's coming our way, but he's going to smell us because we're in the wrong position for where he is. He's going to smell us. He's not, or he or she, they're not going to come. They're going to bend off one way, move off in one direction or the other. Sure enough, man, just within 5 minutes of that, the crows started moving lateral to us in a way, and they said, but you see, we saw footprints, they do strange things with wood. They make these like teepee-like things. They make signs for each other. It's really amazing. You can be walking along in woods if you know what you're doing, and you look up at about the 8-9 foot height level at saplings, and you'll just see them broken over and twisted. And no human being can do that. There's no force in nature can do that. Only a big, powerful, giant hand can snap a sapling over like that and then twist it. And they showed me a couple of those, and they said, now here's another one that they do. These are broken off down at about the 1 or 2 foot level. so that like 90% of the sapling is sticking off in a direction. It's how they give each other signs of some kind or other. They showed me these fences there. They said, now, you know how a normal cattle fence is. It only has to be about 4 feet, 4.5 feet tall to keep cows in. No cows are going over that. Barbed wire, right? They said, but now look here. In these areas, you have 10-foot fences. 10 foot. What are they holding in? And they said, now watch. We'll drive along, and sure enough, in about 4 or 5 places we saw where the top 4 strands had been just broken through and repaired. And they said this is where the Bigfoot walk over the fences. They don't. Right. They break through the top ones. They step over the bottom part, and they break through the top ones, and they go in and they get cattle, and they kill cattle and eat cattle. And I said, why don't they report it? They said because all the farmers in America, every farmer knows, a rancher. I'm saying farmer, but I mean rancher. They all know what happened with the snail darter, what was it, 20, 30 years ago, when they declared all the timber industry just got wiped out in an area because of a little fish called the snail darter, and the environmentalists got up in arms about it, and so they will not report anything to do with hominoids because they don't want their land seized by the government as a protected area for the hominoids. But you go talk to them, and they're pretty open in why they do what they do.
Lloyd, take a breath.
Yeah. Okay. I get excited. I love this stuff.
I know you do. I have a lot to go over with you, so you got to be a little briefer if you can. Okay. I got for one call on Sasquatch and Yetis before we move on. I'm taking it. 760. You're on the air with Lloyd Pye. Why don't you tell us where you're calling from and your first name, please?
Hi, I'm calling from California, Lake Isabella, and this is Denise Zeradia.
Well, thank you for calling. It's great to have you with us. And do you have a question or comment for our guest here on Bigfoot or Sasquatch?
Well, first on that subject, hi, Lloyd, it's Denise.
I know you, babe. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing much better than the last time we spoke.
Right, yeah, we were in Carolina, yeah.
North Carolina, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you guys, Lloyd and I have done a lecture before, like, where was it, in San Diego, when I had that sighting over the baseball stadium, remember?
Right.
Yeah, and...
yeah, we go back a long way. We sure do.
All right, well, now that we know this is a set-up call here, what the hell?
Well, I want you to know I didn't set it up, but I'm glad to hear from her. It's been a while.
No, but I have to say that, before I met Lloyd like 10 years ago and I had first read his book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, I loved that book. It was one of my favorite books because he has such a knowledge of humanoids and Sasquatch and, anything pre-human. His knowledge is incredible, and he states it in a way that is so easy to understand. You don't have to be a scientist to get it. And so when I did meet Lloyd, it's like, oh, my God, the man who wrote this book. So this guy knows what he's doing.
Well,
thank you very much. Very nice plug. Thank you very much.
That was a great plug, and it is a great title of that book. It's a great book. But we're moving on, Lloyd, because I told the folks they could get in one question on Bigfoot, and unfortunately, I just took a groupie of yours, so there you go.
Well, it was but thank you very much for that. That was very good, and Denise is a great girl. She really is.
You deserve a slap on the back every once in a while, too, partner. You know what I'm saying? So
thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Welcome.
We don't make a lot of money doing this, so it's those kind of things that make a big difference.
Darn right, and it's amazing how sometimes how often we get attacked for our motives, and what people think we're driving is even more hilarious. But let's move on. We got to get into Zecharia Sitchen because he had a big impact on you and a breakthrough, so to speak, with the writings and your research and intervention. And I need you to start off and try to pretend that this audience has a very basic understanding of, okay, evolution, we were monkeys, and then somehow, first we were fish, and then we were monkeys, and now we're then we were caveman, like Geico insurance bowling commercial, and now we're human. So tell us a little bit about what intervention is all about from that standpoint, starting from there.
Well, just exactly what you said. We've been told that life moves gradually according to Darwinism, and one species goes into another. There's no evidence of that. That's what the need for a missing link is, but science keeps insisting that it is. And as we were talking earlier, human beings supposedly evolved on a series of steps through a series of creatures called early Australopithecines, Lucy, the famous one, then through to the early what are called Homos, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals. Now that period carries for about 5 million years, what I'm talking about. 5 million years, up to about, for Neanderthals, about 30,000 years ago, which relatively speaking is, very recently. Up through Neanderthals, they all look the same. They have big, giant brow ridges, big round night vision eyes. They have no foreheads. They have big, wide noses splayed across their faces. All of this is like primates. Mouths that stick off their face in the prognathous fashion. No chins, short, squatty necks. They're primates. These are upright, walking primates up to Cro-Magnon. Through Neanderthal, up to Cro-Magnon. They look in a distinctive way, and the only change they really have is their brains getting bigger. So, in jumps, not slowly, but in jumps, their brains get bigger. Neanderthal brain is a little bigger than ours. So then you have Cro-Magnon literally overnight, out of the blue, at about 200,000 years ago.
Okay.
The question is, how'd that happen? How could that be a Darwinian event, an evolutionary event, if there are just no precursors at all of Cro-Magnons? Because Cro-Magnons pull a 180 on every one of those things that I just described. They have very reduced brow ridges. They have rectangular eye sockets that don't see well at night. They have foreheads. They have their brains rearranged from the way Neanderthals are. They have a big lump in the back rear of their heads. We have our extra in our foreheads. We have our noses sticking off our face. We have our teeth pushed in. We have a chin pushed out. We have a longer neck so we can speak. It's just an overnight series of miracles to create a Cro-Magnon. Well, it's clear that is not a Darwinian event. That is not a transition. That is a transformation. How did it happen? Well, what Zecharia Sitchen did was he looked at the writings of the ancient Sumerians, which is a script called cuneiform that they would write into wet clay and then fire it in kilns and turn it into stone. And so those writings were interpreted for the most part between about 1880 and 1930, the mainstream interpretations of them. And they all would read some of the things that the Sumerians would write, and it was like, they can't possibly know this. This can't be true, so they consigned it all to myth. Well, what Zecharia Sitchen did was he looked at it and he said, wait a minute, let's just assume this is not myth, that this is their history as they're trying to tell it to us in the allegorical language that they would use. And he said, if we assume that it's a history and it's real, we get a very interesting picture here. One of the things that they say, among many others, is that there is another planet in our solar system called Nibiru. On that planet, and in it, instead of being a circle around the sun, it's a long ellipse. It was captured later. It wasn't created with the rest of the planets. So it's captured and moves in a long ellipse like a comet, 3,600-year orbit. And that planet Nibiru, on it live people called the Anunnaki, and that they came to Earth and lived around 300,000 years ago for a very long time. And while here, they decided to create a slave and a servant around 200,000 years ago in South Africa to help them mine gold, because they were here to mine gold because they needed it to repair their atmosphere. This is just boiling it down in a very tight package. So here they are creating what they called the Adamu. Their slave was going to be called the Adamu, and they were going to make it, quote, after their own image, in their own likeness, which using a creature of earth as a model, but for the most part making the new creature, the Adamu, like themselves, which they did, and dumbing it down to be a adequate slave and servant so that you could tell it to do things, go do a job, and come back and tell you when it was done. You could tell it to do another one, but not make it as smart as you or anything like that, which explains a lot of what's wrong with us mentally. So that's really it, that the intervention theory says that instead of God with a big capital G creating everything here and doing everything, or instead of nature with a big capital N, which is what the scientists say, nature did everything, instead of either of those two, it's gods, multiple gods, with a small g, living, breathing beings who were here on Earth, the Anunnaki, and who, as part of their process for being here, genetically engineered human beings as we are today, and the evidence of that genetic engineering is very clear in our bodies, in our gene pool, and not only us, but all of the domesticated plants and animals that are on Earth as well, because they too are very, very inexplicable as we are. In fact, Charles Darwin, toward the end of his life, said, if you really look at human beings, they resemble more than anything domesticated animals. It's really what we are. We're no different than any of the other animals and plants that were domesticated by the Anunnaki to, quote, is written in the tablets, to, quote, give the gods their ease. In other words, make their lives easy for their hardship assignment here on Earth. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, and not a very small nutshell, I admit.
Well, no, not at all. And so you got exposed to this, and then you put Sitchen's research in with what was not coming up clearly within Darwinian evolution.
What I saw, Jesse, was that Sitchen had produced a body of work that was like the back end of what I was looking for. And I had a front end that he didn't have. He didn't know anything about hominoids. He didn't know how the front end of it fit. I had the front end. He had the back end that I needed. So I knew that if I put those two things together, my own hominoid research and his research, I could create something new and different and original that it would be really important. And that was the book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, that was just mentioned. And so that's what I did. And that just put me on the map as soon as it came out and I started talking about it and people started, reading it and hearing about it. It was like, oh, wow, this makes sense. And it does. It just really makes a lot of sense when you see the two packages put together. I mean, the irony of it is that this, the talk about aliens and all of that, the hominoid crowd, I speak it to both groups. I have a foot firmly planted in both camps. The hominoid crowd, they don't really buy the UFO stuff very much. And you go to speak to the UFO crowds about hominoids, and you mention hominoids, they don't really buy it that much. They know the UFO crowd, they know that's real because they've seen one or they know somebody that has or something like that. But they listen to what scientists tell them about hominoids. You go to a hominoid crowd, they've seen a hominoid. They know somebody that's seen one or something. But they believe what the scientists tell them about UFOs. It's really amazing to me how people will be completely skeptical about something that they already know about. But if they don't know about it, they'll take the scientist's word for it. It's amazing to me. It really is.
It's funny because then both of those folks, both camps that you speak of, will go into a church together on Sunday or a synagogue or what have you, and have total faith without any real proof being put forth to them. They haven't seen any of these things that they're supposed to live their life through in the Bible and such. But there you go. So blind faith exists when it's indoctrinated properly, I guess, huh?
Absolutely. That you couldn't say it any better, Jesse. That's exactly it. When it's indoctrinated as thoroughly as religion gets indoctrinated, starting with in childhood and working right through, for those that really buy into it and stick with it, It's like, it's just hardwired. It's very hard to change that. It really is.
Well, it is very hard, and when you tell people that they've been indoctrinated incorrectly, I don't think there's a greater insult that you could say to somebody that's of average or above average intelligence. So it becomes a very insulting thing to have to explain.
Well, that's exactly the problem that we have here in the world of alternative knowledge, trying to get across to people, to just mainstream people. And these are the equivalent of worshipers, religious people, but not referencing religion. But if you haven't seen either a UFO or a hominoid, or don't know anybody that has, and it's just never crossed your radar to believe in either one of them, your first reaction to any of it is, oh, that's ridiculous. I'm going to go with the scientists because they would tell the truth. They have a vested interest. They would be delighted if there were to be alien life. They would be delighted if they could find a hominoid. But you go out and you talk to the scientists. You stick an alien skull under their nose, as I do with the Starchild, they go bats. They go nuts. They don't want it at all. It's the last thing they want because it's going to upset their lives. They're going to spend the rest of their lives trying to deal with it, trying to deal with the changes that it's going to cause in everything that they do. And nobody and if I was one of them, I would be exactly the same. I know I would. I would be just as cowardly as they are because, they have their lives to take care of. They have, their kids to put through school, their wives to make happy, or their husbands to make happy, or whatever. It's just they cannot afford the upheaval that the reality of UFOs is going to create, or the reality of hominoids is going to create. So they fight it. They fight it every way they can. Now, it's a losing battle. They're going to lose. UFOs and aliens are real. Hominoids are real. It's just a matter of time before they have to confront those issues and deal with them straight up. But they are going to fight it to the last inch of breath that they have in them.
Well, Lloyd, in fact, just to piggyback on that, I got a phone call from a really good friend of mine that I used to work with over at Yahoo when I worked there in Santa Monica for years. And he said, I think I saw a UFO while I was jogging on the beach this morning. And he started to describe it. And I didn't really pay much attention to it, but I kind of started laughing because what he was describing sounded exactly like a jet. And then I said to him, how often do you really look up in the sky? And when he thought about it, he realized that he doesn't really look up too often. So there's a lot of interesting, neat stuff that our own government makes that they don't share with us, too, that people have to keep in mind. It doesn't take away from anything, but what it proves, the point that I'm making is that Lloyd's right. People are inundated, and we all are. And it took folks like yourself, like me, and others who have decided to separate themselves to a degree or more, Richard Dolan, people like that, and say, I am going to reinvent myself to be able to exist in a different reality where I can experience different schools of thought and be able to live in that reality without ridicule and without a different machine entirely trying to stop me from learning truths. So I have to thank you for doing that, because I think if we had more people like you, who in the past were some of the greatest minds on earth, weren't they? And they were persecuted and stoned and crucified for.
Well, the big changes never come out of the mainstream. The really big changes, the ones that really turn it around, never come out of the mainstream. Einstein wasn't the mainstream. Darwin wasn't the mainstream. It's always outsiders that make the big moves as a rule. Now, every once in a while you'll get somebody like Newton, who's very much known within the circles of what he did. But for the most part, the big leaps, the big changes come from outside, because mainstreams are always ossified. They're always locked into fighting the last war, basically. are to hanging on to the ground that they have. They're not in the business of breaking new ground, of taking giant leaps forward. They're in the business of making very tiny incremental steps forward so that the momentum doesn't disrupt anything. And that's just the way it is. So, yeah, it's going to be people like me or Richard Dolan or some of the others, that are out there doing this kind of work. We're in the vanguard, whether it's realized not now or not, whether it's realized in our lifetime or not. Like Sitchen, he deserves a Nobel Prize, in my opinion, for what he's done, for the body of work that he's produced, for the incredible breakthroughs that he's made. Now, that's not going to happen in his lifetime. But someday down the line, if there's such a thing as a posthumous Nobel Prize, I don't think there is. But he's of that stature, but people don't realize it. But he is, and there are others like him that are going to be known for that in time, but not right now. But where we are right now, in my opinion, it's just like I say in my book, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Every one of the fundamental truths that we think we have a grip on now, and I mean every one of them, is wrong and will be found out to be wrong in the next 100 years or 200 years. We are no smarter about true reality, in my opinion, than they were 200-300 years ago. The ones who believed in the flat earth, we look at them now and it's like, how stupid can you be? The ones who believed that the earth was the center of everything, how stupid could they be? Right now, today, every smart as we think we are, 200 years from today, they're going to be looking back and saying, how could they be so stupid? To me, that's where we are. Because I know that it's all based on wrong things. Everything we think we know is based at the bottom on wrong things. Most of our science is built around the concept of either the cosmology of gravity or evolution. I mean, most of everything we have is built around the cosmology of gravity or evolution, Darwinian evolution. Both of those are just wrong. They're going to be thrown out at some point, and we're going to start over with something new. So when you have the whole basis for what you think you know is wrong at its core, nothing you have is right. Everything, every shred of it has to be rebuilt on the new truth, whatever the new truth is going to turn out to be. Go ahead.
It's funny because the Christians will say they're waiting for the second coming, right? The New Age folks are taking 2012 and saying it'll be a new spiritual enlightenment and a host of other magical things that might occur that will enable humans to achieve a higher level of, humanity. And then there's some folks that are, I don't know what camp to call them. I'm hoping that I'm not part of this camp, but it's almost as though they're looking towards 2012 as finally an answer. For instance, like maybe it's time the Petri dish should be wiped because they feel guilty about what's gone on this planet by so many of us. They almost feel as though we've done a really bad job and that it needs a good scrubbing. You know what I'm saying?
That
so
could well be.
Everybody wants answers.
That. Well, but really, it doesn't have to be a catastrophe in the sense of like what took out the dinosaurs, for example. I mean, they know our gene code. We know our gene code right now. I mean, we're learning it, but we understand how the gene code works. So human beings have a very unique, we have stretches of DNA that are absolutely unique to us. If you know what you're doing, you could create a microbe, a bacteria, a virus, whatever, and put it here in break a couple of vials out into the atmosphere, and within a few weeks, every human being alive could be dead if they wanted that, and not harm another thing out there. Just take us out. That could happen, I think, at any time. Could have happened at any time. I don't know that that's really it. Now, certainly we deserve it. We absolutely deserve it. We have been just terrible stewards of this planet.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is just because of the genetic flaws built into us. If you, this goes back to the Sumerian writings. They were creating us in a hurry. We were a crash program. They had a revolt of their miners down in South Africa, saying, we need help. We don't want to keep doing this hard, heavy, miserable work. Mining is bad work. So, okay, we'll make you a slave and a servant.
Lloyd, you know where they screwed up? I'll tell you where I think they screwed up in their engineering is the one thing that they should have taken out of the human genome, or I'm not a biology person, but testosterone. If testosterone did not exist, what a world we'd live in. I mean, it's probably been the reason for so many things going awry in this world.
There's that, but there's greed. I mean, greed's a big part of it. Envy's another big part of it. Insecurity, ego. I mean, to me, it's a much larger problem than just testosterone is certainly a part. I mean, absolutely a part. But there are many other issues that we deal with as a species that make us a very poor model, a very poor copy. If somebody had to do it over again, they could do an awful lot better than they've done with us. They certainly could. Okay, but I mean, the evidences of the mistakes are just manifest in our bodies. Most people don't realize this, but while we are a 200,000-year-old species with the Cro-Magnons that I was talking about, we were created. Our genes show the same thing, that our mitochondrial DNA, the studies on our mitochondrial DNA indicate the same exact thing that the Sumerians said 5,000 years ago on stone tablets. We found out and confirmed in 1986 and 1987 with the mitochondrial studies. Sure enough, 200,000 years, and the Sumerians said it happened in South Africa. Well, sure enough, our genetic studies show that in South Africa, that was where the oldest of us, sure enough, do come from. So isn't that amazing? 5,000 years ago, they write this, and in 1986, 87, we prove it out to be true. But also, too, we have, in those 200,000 years, accumulated somehow over 4,000 genetic disorders and counting. Now, is that likely in the real world? No, not on your life. Wild species in the wild, they don't have problems. They have some. You have some gene-wide genetic flaws like albinism or something like that. But it doesn't take you out. It isn't like we have spina bifida in every culture in the world, and somebody gets spina bifida, that person's not going to reproduce. How did it get there in the first place? We've got a couple of dozen things that kill you before you can reproduce. So where'd those come from? How'd they get there in the first place? They got put there because we are genetically engineered, and in the process of doing the genetic engineering, mistakes were made. But they're making a slave and a servant, and they're on a crash program. They don't care. They don't go back. They don't fix. They just keep moving ahead till they get what they want, and they leave all the flaws in place. So we are screwed up in just a lot of ways. It's not just one. It's over a lot of them. Okay, listen. We got to get to the real doozy tonight, because if that wasn't enough for you kids, we got to ask Lloyd about the Starchild Skull. So with the last 20 minutes, which is plenty of time without commercials every 4 minutes like most radio shows. I love this format. Go ahead.
It's great, and this is why I drive a 2002 Ford Focus, kids, so stop telling me I have a Mercedes, please.
Hey, listen, I drive a 2002 Impala with 133,000 miles on it. This is the way we live. We have fun. We don't get rich, but we have fun.
And you know what? We live on our terms, and that's what makes it all worth it and not rotting. Let me ask you this. The Starchild Skull, let's break it down. How did it get brought to your attention, and where was this skull first found? Let's start there, and let's try to get our answers a little bit more short and sweet so we can get through it. Gotcha.
I'll try to jam it in. It was found the Starchild Skull was found in about 1930 by a girl in a mine tunnel. She recovered she found two skeletons and ended up recovering the two skulls, one of which she thought was just a human deformity. She kept it her whole life to the early 90s when she found out she was dying, and then she gave it to some friends to keep. They kept it for 5 years. They gave it to another couple, Ray and Melanie Young. All these people lived in El Paso, Texas. And though in Mexico, the girl that found it was of Mexican heritage. She was down 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua visiting the family, and that's how she found him in a mine tunnel. Anyway, Ray and Melanie Young get it. Melanie is a neonatal nurse. She knows right away it's not a human deformity. It's much too light, and it's much too symmetrical. And Ray and Melanie are also members of MUFON in El Paso, Mutual UFO Network, so they also know that it looks just like the the skull that you would expect to fit inside the head of a gray alien. So they believe it could well be the skull of a gray alien. They contact me about it. They show it to me. I know a lot about skulls at that point, and I agree. I say, this is a very, very unusual skull. The possibility to me of it being an alien is remote. I would think it's probably some kind of deformity we just can't put a name to, but I imagine it's 80%, it's a deformity, and maybe 20% it's alien. But let's explore that 20%, because if it is, this is a big deal. So I'm now in my 11th year of trying to get science to pay attention to it, but really it is a real, true bone skull. No question of any doubt. It's not a fake. It's not a phony. It's the real thing. And we've had a lot of scientific tests done on it. Everything we could get done, really, that was of any value or meaning through the time, through that time. And every test that we've had done has indicated again and again and again that it's not a normal, typical human. It's not a human deformity. It is something very highly different. We had a DNA test done in 2003 that made very clear that the mother of the Starchild was indeed a human and the father was not. So it's a human-alien hybrid. And we proved it well enough in 2003 that we could have taken it into a court of law and won, but it's not enough for science. Yes?
Listen, where can people look at the picture of this right now so I can post it in the chat room while we're talking? www.starchildproject.com. www.starchildproject.com. All one word. Throw that in.
And there are a lot of pictures there, lots of pictures.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but get back to the scientific test. The
DNA showed that the mother was human and the father was not. Now, don't think of it as a sexual union hybrid. It's not that. It doesn't have a single corollary to a human in it. Absolutely every single physiological part of the Starchild skull is different from a human being. What you have to imagine is that this, just the way we are a creation of genetic engineering, the Starchild is a creation of genetic engineering. A human female's egg was taken, just like you have all those stories of women today talking about the harvesting program. Aliens come get them, take some of their eggs, make them pregnant. They create, the fetus is taken out in the 4th month, and a few years later they're taken on board and they get to see their child. That's the program of today. The program of 900 years ago, when the Starchild died, could have been very different, probably was very different. But anyway, so you have the egg of a human, and you can take the DNA out of it, the female's DNA, you can take it out, and you can put any combination back in that you want that will come to term. You can make it 90% alien and 10% human. You can make it 95% alien and 5%. You can do whatever you want if you know what you're doing, and that is what the Starchild is. It is something that is dominantly its father. Its mother was a human. She brought it to term. She birthed it, but it's not a human being. It is a very different kind of species. And so this is what we know. We have to prove it now to a level that science can't argue with, and that will be done with a new test from a company called 454 Life Sciences. When I say new, 206. It came available to us in 206, but it cost millions of dollars at that point. They immediately started applying it to the Neanderthal, but now the price is under $200,000, and we can get it done if we can get the money, and we'll have an answer in 3 or 4 months. But we also have to film it, so we need more like $500,000 to start. But once we get that, we will be able to make history absolutely as big as history can be made. The Starchild Skull is the real deal.
What is the test going to definitively prove, Lloyd?
Well, what the test does, Jesse, is it recovers all of the 3 billion base pairs in the genome of the Starchild. So right now we have the genome of the human recovered, all 3 billion base pairs, the chimp, all 3 billion base pairs, the gorilla, all 3 billion base pairs, and very soon the Neanderthal, which has more than 3 billion base pairs. But we'll be able to compare the Starchild's 3 billion base pairs to a human, a chimp, a gorilla, and the Neanderthal. And we will know to an exact percentage how far it was from human, just the way that we know that a chimp is about 3% from human. A gorilla is about 5%. In other words, 95% of a gorilla is the same. 5% is different. 97% of a chimp is the same. About 3% is different. See what I mean? So where the Starchild falls, whether it's 0.5% or 1%, or I think, frankly, it's going to be out with the chimp and the gorilla. I think it's going to be 3%, 5%, maybe more. Because, again, as I said, there's not a single corollary in the Starchild head that matches up. And it's got many things that humans don't have. For example, its bone is half as thick as it ought to be uniformly, weighs half as much, and it's 2 or 3 times as hard. Why is it so hard? Because it's not really like human bone. It's not like any bone. It's like tooth enamel. Its biochemistry is more like tooth enamel, not bone. Within that bone itself are woven fibers in the matrix of the bone that no other animal in the world is known to have. The Starchild is absolutely unique in that regard. Its brain seems to be very different than our brain. It's much bigger than our brain. It seems to be made of different material than our brain. It's very different. Its eye sockets are very different. You know that knot that we all have in the back, rear, middle of our head? Just kind of reaching around to the back of your head and you feel that knot back there where your neck connects to your skull? That's called the inion. Everything has that. Everything with a head on a neck has that except the Starchild. It has a dent there instead of a knot. Its neck is completely rearranged, moved down from that point. The Starchild is so different. There's like 24 major differences and several minor differences. There is not a single piece of it that is human that you can say, okay, well, that's exactly like a human. There's none of that. So we are talking about an absolutely alien thing, and we are going to be able to prove it and prove it to such a degree that science can't complain about it in the least. And that's it. And like I said, history as big as history can be made. We just have to be able to find somebody who will invest in it, give us the money that we need to have the testing and the filming done, and boom, we're off to the races.
Well, wow. This is, I mean, if you look at this, folks, it's just, I don't know. I go with my gut, and it gives me a very eerie feeling in the pit of my stomach. But let me ask you this, Lloyd. This might be one of the biggest archaeological finds ever in the history of humanity. Where do you keep something like this? I mean, you don't keep it in the closet.
No, I don't keep it. The owners keep it, and they keep it. They keep it well cared for. Obviously, we're all very aware of the value of the thing for sure. So they keep it. I kept it for the first year until the first cuts were made into it, and then they blocked it away from that point on, and it's only been out in public one time since at the 60th anniversary of the Roswell crash in Roswell. They brought out the real ones then for people to see, and about 5,000 people came through to take a look at it over those 4 days. So it was pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I was watching a video of yours just recently, and you were at a convention where you had it, and it must be really interesting to hold something like that. It's like when people might say, "Oh, here's a piece of the Roswell crash" or something like that, and you were able to, when I had Jesse Marcel Jr. on here, and he actually handled an I-beam that might have been part of the flying disc. I mean, That's incredible. I mean, just to feel something from another galaxy, planet, civilization, and you're holding this Starchild skull that is most probably a hybrid, an alien hybrid, and there's probably millions of beings just like him. Is it a him or a her?
We don't know. We don't
know.
There's no way to tell that until we have that test done. Then we'll know what it is. But until you can recover its nuclear DNA, there's no way to sex it. Right.
Okay. Wait. Hold on. So let me squeeze in a couple more questions because we're running out of time.
Sure.
Have they re-excavated where it was initially found?
No, we don't know. No, we don't know where it was. She didn't say. You know, when she was dying in the early 90s and telling the second couple that got him, she didn't have any idea that in a few years anything that she said was going to be important, so she didn't give a really detailed analysis of how it happened. So we don't really know the exact village. We don't know certainly where the cave would be, so we don't know any of that. But if what she told us is, what she described is true, then there wouldn't be anything there anyway because she supposedly took all the bones of both skeletons out.
Wow. It would just be so obviously.
All of this, I should say, Jesse, that all of this information is available on the website. You can find an ebook there called Starchild Skull Essentials, and that is just the highlights jammed as tight as I could get it, like a stack of cordwood, all the main facts. If you'd like all the stories, like the backstory of how it was found and the details, and meet the people that were involved and go through the ups and downs that we went through over the first 8 years or so, there's a book called the Starchild Skull. It's a book, and you can get that through Amazon. And the ebook you have to get off the website. But both of those are available for people who are really interested and want to know the story, want to educate themselves about this historic thing that's coming up. And if you want to make yourself the smartest person in the room, if UFOs or aliens get brought up, this is a really good way to do it, because you will be able to impress anybody, even skeptics, when you start throwing out facts and figures regarding the Starchild. It is overwhelming, I promise you.
Well, you know what? Is there a way that folks in the future, down the line, do you have any appearances coming up where, do you ever allow people to touch it?
No, we don't really, unless it's brought out. Like I said, that thing at Roswell, they weren't allowed to touch. They're behind a glass case. They really have to be protected. They're going to be, for at least a time, the most valuable thing in the world once people realize, what it is, once the test comes through and everything. So we act right now like that's what it is. So we take really very good care of it and try to avoid. Like we just had them out again this past weekend, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, so that the Monster Quest people could come in and shoot it, and they did. So they were out, and I did get to play. And, they're old friends to me now, but I don't get to see them very often. They're like friends you get to visit with every 2 or 3 years or something like that. But we brought them out a year ago for the UFO hunters, and now we've brought them out for the Monster Quest, and that show should be on TV late January, early February, somewhere in there.
Looking forward to that. Now, listen, let's do a web chat room question.
Sure.
Okay. Here's the question. Like a pretty good one, too. Question is from Spin Dave, who writes, since they haven't tested the nuclear DNA, how do they know that it has one parent Earthling and the other parent alien? The mitochondrial DNA comes from the mother, not the father.
Right. That's exactly right. We were able to recover the mitochondrial DNA very easily, first attempt. So we know that the DNA is good, it's very fresh, not degraded, and it said that the mother was from a group called haplogroup C. So we also know that the two skeletons found together were not genetically related because the human was haplogroup A. Now, the human's nuclear DNA was also recovered very easily on the first time because they were buried in a mine tunnel. There's no degradation there, even after 900 years. So when it came time to do the Starchild's nuclear DNA, that comes from both parents. We already know now that the mother's a human, so half the equation is filled. All we need is to, recover any of its nuclear DNA, and we know both of the parents were human. In 6 full attempts, there was no recovery of the nuclear DNA. Now, if you know the DNA is good, if you know there's no degradation, which we know, then the only possible answer is Dad is not a human. Because if Dad was a human, then the primers of the time, this is back in 203, all we had was primers, and that's stretches of DNA a few hundred to a few thousand base pairs long. They're like keys that fit in locks, just biological keys that fit in biological locks. They weren't there. There was no way for the key to find a lock that fit because Dad wasn't human. But all we could say at that time in 203, science wouldn't let us say, well, we have an alien here, because they say, oh, no, you can't say that, because how do you know how far away the father was from human? He could have just been a razor width away, just enough to where the primers wouldn't pick him up. But that doesn't mean that he's an alien. That just means he's a very weird human. And you're not going to be able to say this is an alien unless you show that it's really far away from human. And so that's what the new test can prove. It can prove that it's 1% away or 2% away or 3% away. Because remember, if you're a human being, you're within 99.9%. We're very much like clones. We are domesticated, so we are therefore very much like clones. Chimps are very different among themselves compared to us. We're like clones compared to chimps or gorillas or anything natural in the wild. So we're all, if the Starchild strays outside of the 99.9 very far at all, it's not human. So, like I say, if we get a 0.5%, we win. Full percent, we win. It's easy. But I think it's going to be out by chimp or gorilla territory just because the skull alone is so very different.
Okay, listen, we're out of time. I gave out the website. Give it out one more time so everybody knows.
Starchildproject.com, starchildproject.com, or if you're interested in the intervention theory, lloydpye.com. The book is Everything You Know Is Wrong. You can get it at www.iuniverse.com. You can get the Starchild book from Amazon. You can get the Starchild ebook from the website, starchildproject.com.
We got it. Lloyd Pye, you're a class act, and you know what? You're a revolutionary kind of guy, and you have the, as Alejandro T. Rojas would say, quiones to walk the path less traveled. So congrats to you, my friend, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, and I really look forward to being on at some point in the future. 15 minutes to live, because that was the little time it would take for one of those intercontinental ballistic missiles to come and, blow up. So that was really it. And we had a great comic in the South named Brother Dave Gardner, and he did a little bit on that was really cute. He said, people always say, what would you do if you found out you had those 15 minutes to live? What would you do if you found out that the missiles were on their way and you had the 15 minutes? What would you do? He said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd sit down and think about it. That's it.
Exactly, yeah. I know.
What the hell else could you do? I mean, what else could you do? I'd have to sit down and think about what I wanted to do in my last 15 minutes if that was really all I had. So anyway, that's the time that I come from, and that's a little bit of my background.
Okay, fair enough. And to react to that, I tried to get people to utilize this film to just start thinking about that short list of what would you do, So fair enough.
Well, 2 years is luxury compared to what we grew up with,
Absolutely.
I mean, luxury.
And later on in the program, maybe we'll take some calls together and have some fun with that. But let's get into how you obviously switched from this pretty. I'm gonna assume here, Lloyd, but a pretty straight-laced person working, intelligence, military, rules, regulations, codes, ethics, whatever you want to call it, quote, end quote. And then 20 years you've been delving into all kinds of alternative sources of knowledge, and we're going to talk about some of your thoughts about Sasquatch, and then, of course, the intervention, which I want you to explain to this audience. How did that happen? How did your brain switch gears, or was it always switched?
Well, no, it was. I was really very much a straight arrow, as you say, through high school. I did the right thing through high school. I was the all-American boy. I was the kid that other parents threw up to their kids and say, why can't you be more like him, kind of thing. It just didn't occur to me. I came up with a strict militaristic dad and just followed the rules, and I found that pretty much the rules had actual real backgrounds here in the States, that they weren't plants from Russia. You had to verify that they went to high school, that they went to college or wherever, just that they were real, true American citizens. And so a lot of what we did was actually legitimately that cause, that concern. A lot of people in the military, a lot of people in government needing security clearances of different kinds. So it was legitimate stuff. But a lot of what we did, this is the embarrassing part, a lot of what we did was check up on these young women between the ages of, say, 18 and 35, let's say. And that was because at that time there was an unwritten, unspoken, but very active rule that when any man of any power at all in America took a mistress, he was obligated, sort of, to have her checked out to make sure that she was an American girl. And so we did. That's what we did. We did an awful lot of that as well. So it's not anything to brag about.
So you were in charge of frisking powerful people's concubines?
Well, not frisking them, but checking them out. Just checking out that it was the real stuff, and that they could imbibe to their full extent without having to worry about it. And I don't know. I never found nothing that ever crossed my desk was not a legitimate girl, but. There were really hundreds of us in the country, and I'm sure that eventually some guys found Russian plants. I'm sure they existed. You wouldn't have had all that effort if there wasn't something to the story, but it just never happened to me.
It's so amazing when you learn about that time period, if you were a little guy, or if you weren't around like I wasn't back then, about the paranoia involved with
it was unreal. You were talking about what would you do in your last 2 years. You're sitting here 2 years. Luxury. You got everybody right now. Luxury. This is wonderful. We lived, I did for a good 20 years growing up and well into adulthood. I lived with the surety, not just the idea, but the surety that if someone went nuts in the Kremlin or if someone went nuts in the States and pressed a button, we'd all have about 15 minutes to live. I mean, that was the deal. You've got living, upright walking primates. So to me, it was just an easy connection to say, hey, the hominoids are the pre-humans, and so therefore humans don't have a place on the flow chart of life on Earth. Where did we come from? And it was clear to me then we didn't fit with anything else. We don't look like anything like primates that we're supposedly descended from. And we knew by then that the chromosome count was wrong for us, that all the higher primates had 48 chromosomes and we had only 46. So there were a lot of things coming up that was making it seem like we were Johnny-come-latelys here on Earth, but there was no way to explain it. And then Eric von Daniken produced his wonderful book in about 69, 70, just when I was graduating or a year or two after. Then when von Daniken brought out the possibility that aliens had lived on the Earth, that was wonderful, Chariots of the Gods, but he had no mechanism. He didn't have a mechanism to explain how they got here and how the megaliths and the other things had gotten here. No mechanism. So he was just dismissed. Everybody knows what happened to him. But then Zecharia Sitchen in 1976 wrote a book called The 12th Planet, and that provided the mechanism. But unfortunately, I was by that time wrapped up in a fiction writing career, and I was living in L.A. and I became a screenwriter, and so I spent most of the 80s doing that. So I missed Sitchen's book for all that time, and somebody who directed me to it in about 1990. All of this time, I know the situation with the hominoids and the humans, but I don't have a mechanism for how we got here. So I'm just sort of sitting out there, can't do anything.
Hold on, Lloyd.
Sure. Yes.
Stay with me, because we're jumping there too fast. Because I want to stay on the hominoids for a second here, because we've had so basically the hominoids, a la Yeti, Bigfoot. That was your gateway into the ultimate science realm, correct?
Right, exactly. Tools worked for me. I had a lot of things going for me, and I didn't really have a rough ride through high school. But when I got into college, I played football on a scholarship at Tulane, and there I began to run into the inequities and the imbalances of the world. And for me personally, I had a wonderful experience up through for the most of high school, and particularly in sports. I'd done really well, and then I got to Tulane, and I found out the gross mediocrity of most coaches at that level in the world, and it just, the dichotomy of it was a real shock to me, and I didn't get over it for quite a long time. And then my senior year, so I was beginning to rebel right then, and my senior year in college, I read a book about hominoids. It was called The Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, by Ivan Sanderson, and that was, and still is, one of the great books produced about the field of hominoid research, hominoid being Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Abominable Snowman, Yeti, and the two other kinds that dominate around the world that we can talk about later. But at that point, I read that book, and it was just a seminal moment in my life. I was like, okay, I want to know more about this. I believe this, man. I believe this. These things are real. I'm not being told the truth, and I want to know more. And I just began to work at it. And it wasn't really forbidden knowledge. It was just hidden. It wasn't easy to get to. It wasn't really common, other than the work of that man, Ivan Sanderson. So I just got what I could whenever I could, but I continued on living my life, but keeping my eyes peeled and doing what I could and wanting to know more about hominoids. And so as about 10 years into that, by the time I was about 30, I understood, I just had a grip on the idea that what we were being told was pre-humans, and this was even before Lucy, but it was what little there was about the pre-humans at that time was clear to me that they were the fossil skeletons of the way people were describing these hominoids.
Okay, we're back. Game changers. Think about it. Game changers. Moving the needle. I think this gentleman could perhaps possibly be a future game changer. And his name's Lloyd Pye. Lloyd, are you on the phone with us?
I sure am, Jesse. Glad to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us, sir. And like I said, you get granular with the subject. It's one of my favorite words, and it's going to be exciting to hear all about the amazing research you've been doing with a lot of stuff, like you said, that we've been taught incorrectly. So welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
If you don't mind me asking, where are you calling out of tonight?
Florida, the panhandle of Florida between Destin and Panama City.
Fantastic. I have relatives myself in Delray. Well, I think where I want to go tonight, Lloyd, first talk a little bit about your background, because what I found really interesting about you is that not only do you have a psychology degree from Tulane, but you also were in the Army. So why don't you tell us a little bit of career, because you did work in intelligence.
Right. I had an interesting career, such as it was. It's an embarrassing career, actually, to tell you the truth. It's not something you want to tell your family or your kids. You know the old line about what did you do in the war, Daddy? Well, I never had any children, but It wouldn't be something I would want to be proud to tell them. The truth of it was, in the intelligence work that I did, basically we just did background investigations. Now, understand this is in 1970, 71. Okay, so we're in the teeth of the Cold War. We're in the teeth of Vietnam. So it's a very different time than we have now. And at that time, Russia was the big enemy, and they were supposedly infiltrating us left and right. So what we did, what the intelligence agents did stateside, was check people to verify who were asking for security clearances, to verify that they had